Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear liners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you could pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
My God, if there is ever a crisis looming that we're not responding to that's going to smash into the budget, it's climate change.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, the Dean of Green for the Democrats. He's my guest today, live from Washington.
Holding the powerful accountable from Washington, D.C. to right here in southern New England. This is 10 News Conference with Gene Valicenti.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gene Valicenti. Let's begin with Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Joined me from Washington via hookup. Senator, I'm a little disappointed. I thought you'd be in my studio today. Why are you in Washington? I know you're doing the people's business. What was the delay?
I know. I wanted to be with you in the studio, Gene, and I apologize, but the FISA bill, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, took some time to get out of the House, and it expires at the end of the day Friday, and we've got a lot of amendments and quarreling to do in the Senate, so we need to be here through into tonight when we'll finally vote to reauthorize the foreign intelligence surveillance measures.
Yeah, that's a controversial. Boy, that's a sticky wicket. The House Speaker could lose his position over this. They're going after him. They didn't like that he let it out of the House. This is the FISA. All right, now put your U.S. Attorney's cap on. Give us the simple explanation, FISA, and why you might vote one way or another on it.
Well, I will be voting for it. What it does is allows the United States government, the intelligence community, to essentially wiretap foreigners, people who don't have any American rights, people who we have reason to believe are engaged in terrorist and criminal activities, so that we can hear from them who they're talking to in the United States who might be plotting some kind of harm to our country. So it's a very important resource for the intelligence community, and they use it very effectively.
Well, critics say Americans can get caught up with it, and then you have to trust government people to keep them masked or unmasked. And we've had some screw-ups. So you know the other side of the story. Give voice to that.
Yeah, the other side of the story is really to try to protect Americans who are what you call incidentally collected. And the problem with that argument is that from the very days of the founding fathers, when the sheriff was allowed to go into somebody's house with a warrant and seize their correspondence, you incidentally collected the correspondence that had been mailed to them by somebody else. And when I was doing wiretaps and pen registers, we were incidentally picking up who the subject of the wiretap or the pen register was talking to, including listening in on their calls and hearing the person whose incidental collection was involved in the warrant. So incidental collection has been the rule and the law of the land from the very founding of the Republic. And I think it's very legitimate in this case where we're trying to protect against international terrorism.
You know, I can understand that. Sure, I could see the pamphleteers or someone in the colonial Newport getting caught up in this. But, you know, we live in a cyber age now. And the critics say there have been abuses, and plenty of them, Senator. Do you see the other side of the story with FISA?
Oh, yeah. And I think there are significant arguments. We've been pressing on the Department of Justice and on the intelligence community to repair the flaws. And there are significant reforms already baked into the bill as it is going to be passed into law. So those have not gone ignored. And the question for objectors are, was that enough? Or do we need to do more? Do we need a further warrant requirement when an American's name comes up?
So you're a yes on that. All right, Senator, you and I are taping 10 o'clock on a Friday morning. Overnight, Israel struck back at Iran, actually sent some missiles, and they say they got some Iranian missile sites, and theirs got in, right? Versus last week when Iran attacked Israel, 99% of it didn't get in. Senator, your thoughts on that? You know, this is going against what the White House with President Biden, what Senator Jack Reed has been urging. Israel, sit tight, don't retaliate. They thumbed their nose at us again.
Yeah, they've gotten pretty good at that. And I think it's unfortunate that they take this tone with America while also depending on us for so much. I put the blame for that entirely on Prime Minister Netanyahu. And but I do think in this case, it looks like the Iranians are trying to downplay this. They are not trying to make things worse and stir up trouble further. I think the Israelis send a message that they can reach inside Iran. And I hope at this point, with both sides having made their messages, the attack on the embassy, the drone attack back on Israel, the countermeasure to the missile sites, that everybody now calms down and goes back to the business of building a structure for Mideast peace, which is the really important thing to accomplish.
Yeah, Senator, with Netanyahu kind of thumbing our nose at the Biden administration. By the way, he says, I know best what's for Israel. Do you see a larger conflict here? Is this going to draw us into this and eventually the Chinese and the Russians too? Is it that risky?
There's a chance of that, which is why I think it's so important that we pursue the Mideast peace structure. And what's going on there is that a lot of the leaders of Arab countries, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, are working with Israeli politicians on that structure. They have told me personally that they have to work around Netanyahu because he is unhelpful and not interested in peace and basically trying to foment enough conflict that he can stay in place as prime minister and prevent himself from being subject to the criminal prosecutions that are pending against him and his family in Israel.
You know, this kind of talk, well, you'll say, honest brokering, honest criticism of Israel, this was unheard of not that long ago. I remember I had the then new Senator Chafee in on 10 News Conference, and he used the phrase that, well, the Israeli lobby is a very powerful lobby. And he said that, and that kind of, that raised red flags back then. Wow. And now we're openly criticizing the Prime Minister of Israel and Israel's offensive. This is a change, isn't it, Senator? What do you owe that to?
I owe that to the behavior of Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think his behavior has been very dangerous. I think he's been dangerous to the Israel-U.S. relationship, which is a very important relationship on both sides. And I think he's been dangerous to the process for Mideast peace. And senior interlocutors in that process say quite plainly to people like me that they think that he is behaving this way because he wants to create enough ruckus that he doesn't get removed as prime minister because he's a wartime prime minister, and therefore he doesn't have to face the criminal charges that he's looking at. He's trying to stay out of an Israeli orange jumpsuit.
Yeah, all right. Speaking of your predecessor, Senator Chafee, you know, when the whole conflict with Ukraine started, Senator Chafee said, well, we baited them, making in treaties to have Ukraine join NATO. And we kind of laid it at Putin's doorstep, and we kind of baited him. Now here we are. Listen, we're in it, and you're trying to get the Ukrainians more money, but it's stalled. So what's the danger there? And take that, then we'll go to a break, Senator.
The danger there is that Putin isn't satisfied with attacking Ukraine, that he then moves on to the Baltic states, that he then moves on to challenging Poland, and that he makes good on the promise he's publicly made to try to rebuild the Soviet empire.
Senator, let me challenge you there. From what I see, he can barely take Ukraine. How is he possibly going to go after Poland and the entire West?
Well, I think Ukraine has stunned the world with how forcefully it's been able to defend itself. Remember, all of our intelligence community and military folks were saying they're done in 2 weeks. So this has been a big surprise to everybody. Ukraine has done magnificent things. It's a little bit different if you're going after a very small Baltic country.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And so I think that the risk is real, and that's why we need to support Ukraine and why I've been such an ardent supporter of making sure they have the munitions they need to defend themselves and drive the Russians out of their country.
But Senator, let me repeat, he could barely take Ukraine. He could barely take Ukraine. It's dragging on. He thought 2 weeks. It's not 2 weeks, it's 2 years. He could barely take Ukraine next door. How is he ever going to take Poland and the West on? Impossible.
It would be a real challenge, but the problem is if he did something stupid, Poland is protected by Article 5 and NATO.
Right.
And so you now have a full-on conflict between Russia and NATO, which is obliged to come to the military aid of Poland. We're a little bit fortunate that the Ukraine conflict, with Ukraine not being a part of NATO, does not trigger reciprocal obligations and doesn't automatically lead to a wider war. That's the danger. He could be very wrong and very stupid about his ability to succeed in Poland and still provoke the kind of conflict we're trying to avoid. So the best solution is to drive him out of Ukraine and send him with two black eyes home to rethink his strategy of attack and interference in democracies.
All right, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is my guest.
Thank you for turning to 10, your news leader. 10 News Conference with Gene Valicenti continues right now.
Sheldon Whitehouse, U.S. Senator from Rhode Island, is my guest. Senator Whitehouse, just a day or two ago, the case against Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas, the impeachment case against him, was dismissed before it even got started. Preliminary stuff, and then they threw it out. I know you support that. You agree it was the right thing to do. Let me play your distinguished colleague, the great senator from Louisiana, Senator Kennedy, who disagrees with you. Let's play.
Every single time, except when the public official has quit, the United States Senate has done its job through thick and thin, whether the Democrats were in the majority or the Republicans were in the majority. Didn't matter who the president was. We did our job because we respect the institution of the Constitution. We respect the three branches of government. We respect the United States House of Representatives. We respect them enough to do our job.
The distinguished gentleman says you should have had a trial, that you've altered history going forward, Senator.
Senator Kennedy is an entertaining colleague who I'm very fond of. We do a lot of work together because he's my lead Republican on my courts subcommittee. I disagree with him on this. I think the flaw here is not in the Senate not having a trial. It's in the House sending over a bogus impeachment with articles of impeachment that never even specified a single crime or misdemeanor committed by the secretary. So even in court, whereas you mostly have trials, there's a thing called a motion to dismiss. And if the case as initially brought is defective or inadequate, then you dismiss it. And that's exactly what the Senate did. It's consistent with our long-standing legal traditions. And the blame for the variation from the past belongs squarely on the House sending over a completely inadequate piece of political theater instead of a real impeachment.
On the merits of the border being screwed up on Mayorkas to blame for that, what do you say? That's a little differently, isn't it? By the way, Mayorkas the other day used the word crisis. Yes, we have a crisis at the border. That's a change in language for him, Senator. On the merits.
The border is a mess. And one of the frustrations here is that instead of passing, I've been involved in a couple of bipartisan immigration deals. And the last one got out of the Senate with a big bipartisan vote, died in the House when the Republican speaker wouldn't call it up, give it a hearing, have a vote, amendments, anything. And we were close again. We had a bipartisan bill that would have sent revenues to the border, that would have put more officers on the border, put more judges to adjudicate cases, put more fentanyl detection equipment along the border to grab it when it comes through in trucks, and solves a big problem here, which is reforming the asylum rules and processes. And we still need to do that. Even if we'd convicted Mayorkas, none of those things would have happened. We need to get back to work on a bipartisan immigration reform. And unfortunately, it's President Trump who pulled the rug out from under that once we had a bipartisan deal. He said, blame me. Okay, I do. I blame him.
Well, the other side of that story is that the bipartisan deal was so weak, allowing for, 5,000 a day to cross, and then stricter measures would kick in. You can correct me on that because you went over it piece by piece. But there was another side of that story. And by the way, are you going to absolve President Biden of any blame for the border mess? Your word, border mess.
No, I think that the president, everybody is to some degree responsible in all of this. And it's been, more than a decade in which Congress has not passed a serious immigration reform, knowing all of these things. These are all things we can do. We can add new officers to the border. We can beef up the adjudication. We can install the machines that'll stop the fentanyl. We can fix the mess that the asylum program now is. We can do all of those things, but we have to get together and pass a law and get it to the president's desk. He asked for a lot of this authority. He asked for billions of dollars. We have not given it to him. So to Biden's credit, he has tried, but it's a very difficult situation. And clearly, we have not succeeded at securing the border.
All right, since we brought up the former president's name, Donald Trump, you once told me, I think it was 2 appearances ago on 10 News Conference, that it was a very slippery slope to go down for the party in power to prosecute the former president of the other party once he's out of office. Boy, when you and I had that conversation, it was almost an abstract thought. And now look at this, Senator, 6 trials. 6 trials, individual trials, they're going against Trump. As you speak, it's a hush money case in New York. You would have never imagined this. Is it still a slippery slope?
It still is a slippery slope, and I think it's, as people are fond of saying, it is unprecedented. But it's also unprecedented to have an individual who's been president of the United States filing false financial statements to hide payments to a porn star for some secrecy about an affair that he's had and for hiring a newspaper to try to help cover it up. So, I mean, the whole situation is unprecedented, embarrassing, deplorable, but you don't get an exemption from the laws just because you once were president.
Right. Senator, don't make me try to go toe-to-toe with you, former U.S. attorney. I didn't go to law school, but let me just try to present the other side. It's not illegal to pay hush money in New York. If you want to bring him up, to be a misdemeanor case of phoning up the bank records. And this is Alvin Bragg, the liberal Soros prosecutor, who's trying to get him on federal campaign charges. How did I do, Professor?
You did all right. You left out the part about the grand jury that indicted him, about the judge that has upheld the charges. You know, there's an awful lot of procedure that protects a criminal defendant, even a weak criminal defendant, from abuse by the system. And here you have one of the most powerful men in the country with lawyers to throw at the problem in every single direction, with his social media to whip up public sentiment. He's got a lot going for him. And the process has nevertheless proceeded according to the way the law works in the United States of America.
Yeah, you know, Stephen A. Smith was on ESPN, and he may be angling for getting on Fox, I don't know. But look, he has a voice, and he says he's telling his followers, listen, you can't get him at the polls, so you got to get him in the courts. And the polls show, listen, surprising. The guy's got 6 cases against him. He's still beating Biden by a point in the Siena poll. He's beating him by a couple of other points in other polls. What do you make of this, Senator?
Well, if he did, in fact, break the law, if he did file false documents in New York, if he did try to interfere with the Georgia election unlawfully, if he did hide classified documents unlawfully at his place in Mar-a-Lago and elsewhere, if he did those things that broke the law, the fact that you are a politician doesn't get you out from under your responsibility to obey the law. The law applies equally to everybody, politician, president, or not.
Yeah, well, let me again do my job here, the devil's advocate. I guess if the president is shown to have taken money from his son Hunter Biden, loans of $200,000 that happened to come in on the same day that the brother got payments from the Chinese, I guess the law is the law, right? Let the chips fall where they may?
The law is the law, and as to those allegations, even in the partisan House of Representatives that's trying to manufacture an impeachment of President Biden, they haven't been able to create any evidence or proof of any of that. Their whole effort has been a complete flop and is now more or less a mockery. So, when the evidence is there, that's what matters in court, not just when politicians are making comments in a partisan forum.
All right, let's talk again about the president and courts and prosecutors. What did you make of that special prosecutor who said, I couldn't bring charges against the president? Basically, he'll come across to a jury as a kind old man with a bad memory, and I'm putting it diplomatically, Senator. But that's the first president I've heard described like that. We couldn't bring him up on a trial because his memory would be too faulty. What a blow that was.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing because elsewhere in the same conversation, they described him as having, I think, photographic recollection. So the thing that got into the public report was that he would have come across as I don't remember the exact words, but a kindly, nice, forgetful person.
Right.
And at the same time, they also said that his memory was photographic. And the only thing they put in the report was the first one, not the second one. I think there's a larger problem here. I've been a prosecutor, Gene, and I think it's terrific to be a prosecutor. It's a great job, but every once in a while, you have to take a hit because you don't get to explain yourself. You just make your decision. And I think when Jim Comey tried to explain himself in not charging Hillary Clinton and broke a lot of department guidelines, and when this prosecutor tried to explain himself, it's really simple. If you're not bringing charges, you thank the agencies for their hard work and their diligence in putting the evidence together. You say that the evidence did not support the elements of the charge, and that's it. You don't get to say, oh, and by the way, he's a jerk.
Yeah.
Or, oh, and by the way, I don't like him. Or, oh, and by the way, she's a bad person. You just have to stay within your lane. And I think the Department of Justice has now repeatedly gone out of its lane. And the most egregious example of that was FBI Director Comey.
Yeah, well, back to this particular prosecutor. Senator, on the merits, again, it did seem to have landed with the American public. By the way, polls show more than 70% think the president is not up to the job. Let's play a quick soundbite. This was just the other day, the president recounting a story with his uncle. And on this particular day, he looked a little slow. He looks better on some days than others. I'll give him that. On this day, let's listen.
And my uncle, they called him Ambrose Brosey, they called him Bozy. My uncle Bozy was a hell of an athlete, they tell me, when he was a kid. And he became an Army Air Corps before the Air Force came along. He flew those single-engine planes as reconnaissance over war zones. And he got shot down in New Guinea, and they never found the body because there were a lot of cannibals for real in that part of New Guinea.
White House later clarified his uncle did serve. Plane went down. The uncle never got out of the plane, went down with the plane. Cannibals, whether they exist in that part, it wasn't part of it. But you can see what we're getting at. President likes to tell stories, some of them proven to be not true at some times, and sometimes he's slow. More than 70% of Americans think he's not up to the job for another 4 years. You say what, Senator?
Well, in all of my dealings with him, he has been fully up to the job. And if you look at the results of the biggest climate bill, the first major infrastructure bill, the biggest restructuring of the chips and science industry. He has really, really pulled together folks to get things done in Congress. He has been a consequential president. He's moved the country in the right direction. And I hope that voters will reward that in November. I
am not surprised at anything you just said. All right, quickly on climate control. Listen, there's the bloom off the rose for electric cars. I drive one, you drive one. I think it's the same car, and yet Ford and other industries are abandoning ambitious plans for electric cars. What's going on, Senator?
The market for electric vehicles continues to climb. More and more are sold every year. I think that the companies might have planned for a larger market than there is. But it certainly continues to climb, and the more the build out of chargers happens and the more the range of cars grows, I think the electric vehicle is the future.
When I go to the radio studio, I take my electric car over the broken Washington Bridge. Half of it is usable, the other half is not. This has kind of become a national story. Buttigieg was up here. Your thoughts on that? Who's to blame? Are you looking for a blame here?
I'm not looking for blame. I'm looking for revenue, for funds to get to Rhode Island to rebuild the bridge. We're working together as a delegation. We're using, I hope, the Baltimore Bridge emergency as a vehicle for moving funding more rapidly to the state. And we're hoping to get perhaps as much as 90% of the necessary funding on the federal side. That's our goal.
All right, 30 seconds, Senator. Hard out. What's your top priority? What do you want to leave the people of Rhode Island with today? 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Well, first of all, I've got about $300 million worth of work happening in Rhode Island in roads and bridges while we're on the infrastructure subject. It came through the law that I wrote to try to make sure that you could get federal funding to the viaduct. And now we're using it in 4 different projects around the state.
Okay,
and
Senator,
I think it's very important.
Thank you, Senator. We'll continue it on the radio. Good to have you in, as always. That's 10 News
My
Conference.
pleasure always.